This is Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi. Glad to see again from Tokyo, Ambassador Ichiro Fujisaki. He is Japan's former envoy to the US, the UN, and the WTO. Ambassador Fujisaki, great to see you on StratNews again. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Ami-san.
Also from Canberra is Rear Admiral James Goldrick. He's retired from the Australian Navy and is currently a visiting fellow with the Sea Power Centre and an adjunct professor at the Strategic and Defence Centre at ANU and NSW in Canberra. Admiral Goldrick, glad to have you back on StratNews as well.
Thank you for having me, and it's an honour to be here with the Ambassador as well.
It's our complete pleasure. Ambassador, just your comments on the first day of what happened in Alaska and Anchorage. It's being called a Quad of a different kind. I mean, 2+2 in terms of the US and China for the first time in the Biden administration. And a lot of calling a spade, which was not expected in terms of on camera. We usually hear the diplomatic platitudes. At the most, people are curt. But here, each side took over an hour in what was supposed to be 8 minutes. How do you see what happened in Alaska, Ambassador?
I am not representing the government, but my personal view, because I think 2 points are important. It's still only the first day, and you have the next day. That's point one. Point two is, unlike between sort of partners like Japan and US, or Japan and India, or Japan with Australia, you see, there are problems, and there are domestic constituencies, people who want their representative to be tough. If they don't take tough attitude, they'll be criticized in the country. That's true for Chinese. So they have to say everything, especially in front of camera. So I don't know what is going to really happen over dinner or whatever, but I think on the before the camera, I think both sides need to say what they have to. So these are the two things I get from that.
Admiral Goldrick, the domestic constituency, whether it's in China or the region, and then the larger global arena, do you think this is messaging only of that sort, or did the Chinese come prepared and the Americans didn't know what hit them?
I think when you say domestic audience, especially in Chinese delegate would see not the Chinese people, but the authorities in China. And they want their representative to be tough. And I think that's a little true for Americans as well. Because Congress people and journalists and everyone's watching. Hey, you've been saying you're going to be tough, but you were not that much. So I think what's appearing on the first 8 minutes on television may not really reflect what's really going on as well. So I think you have to be careful. And again, it's only the first day.
Admiral Goldrick, do you agree with that assessment, or do you think the Chinese have come with a prepared game plan?
I hope the Ambassador is correct. I worry a little that the Chinese have got themselves so far in a certain direction that it will be difficult for them to recover and compromise, because so far they've been indicating they don't want to compromise on anything. So I think there was an element of theatre, but as I say, I do have this concern that China has put itself into a cul-de-sac and can't easily get out of it without loss of face.
Without loss of face. So if you see that going on to what happened behind closed doors, and the last statement that came from the US side was that whatever we've said in public is exactly what we're going to say in private as well. If that continues, Admiral Goldrick, into the second day as well in Alaska, what do you see as the outcome?
I see as the outcome that we really won't move anywhere and make any progress on any issues in the short term. I hope that there might be potential for cooperation over, for instance, dealing with the global pandemic. But again, it seems to me that both China and the United States are in positions where it will be very difficult for them to appear to compromise in a way that undermine the position they'd already taken. So I think that if that language continues over the next couple of days, the remainder of the talks, then we're in a position where no progress has been made, and there will continue to be the rubbing against each other in all the ways that have happened over the last couple of years, even though, of course, it's the Biden administration now and not that of Trump.
So, Ambassador Fujisaki,
yes?
Your reading of how it will proceed, I mean, even if, as you say, best case scenario, there's a separate public message and a separate private message, the Americans have made it clear this is a one-off unless there is some movement. The Chinese have publicly called it a strategic dialogue with the USA. It isn't.
I had focused on Foreign Minister Wang Yi's interview with their national newspaper, Xinhua, on August the 6th. He said 4 principles with China. 1, no confrontation. 2, dialogue. No zero-sum game, and no decoupling. These are the 4 things China wants. And of course, you can say that it's only something sort of superficial, but still, it's sending a message that they want to improve their relations with United States, not really compromising their position. That's what China would like to do. And I think Chinese former Foreign Minister, Mrs. Hu Yin, has contributed to an article, op-ed to New York Times, saying that the U.S.-China relations should be competitive cooperation. I'm sorry, collaborative competition. And I think that it's a sending message to U.S. that we want to improve the relations. But the very point is that they're not changing the attitude. So what Americans are saying, hey, we are going to, we may change position if you change your attitude. The very big difference with Trump's administration here is that the Americans are not talking about the Chinese system, Communist Party itself. If you remember, all this 4 or 5 statements came out from Pompeo and others. They all sort of focused on Chinese system, Communist Party and itself. But if you look at, for example, Japan, U.S. joint statement, we only discussed the behavior, conduct of China. So if they change these conducts, South China Sea, East China Sea, and the domestic Uyghur and Hong Kong, there's room for a change as well. I think that's the very important part.
That's fine, but Ambassador, do you see that behavior in any manner changing actually because of various?
I think, of course, China will not change at instant, but to keep saying that to China is important. And if you don't do that, if you just try to ameliorate, improve the relations without China changing the attitude, I think that's sending a wrong message. At the same time, if you tell Chinese that unless you change this total system, I think we're not going to collaborate, then that will really corner China as well. So try to say that you have to change your behavior, conduct, I think is the right attitude. And that's what they're doing now. That's my reading.
As the ambassador is pointing out, there was US and Japan 2+2, the US South Korea 2+2. Defense Secretary Austin is in Delhi as well. The defense, and he's also spoken to the Australian Defense Minister. Meanwhile, in between, do you see all those movements, Admiral Goldrick, as giving the Americans and the world at large a stronger hand when it comes to talking to China or dealing with China?
I certainly think it does, because what you're seeing is confirmation of the importance of networks and relationships and cooperation. And, the fact the Americans have sequenced in that way, I think is significant. And I do think it really is indicative to Japan, and to Japan, to India, to South Korea, and to Australia, that America is back in a more coherent, cooperative form. There's always been cooperation, even at the worst of the Trump administration, but it is more coherent. But I think that's a signal to China that there are these networks, there are these cooperative mechanisms, and that they are pretty well established already anyway. And, the more people are concerned with China's behavior, and I think that's a particularly good point the ambassador's making. Fundamentally, it's China's behavior that is the difficulty for us all. The more China behaves in certain ways, the stronger those relationships will become, the more cooperation there will be, and indeed the worse China's position is relative to everybody else for China's legitimate aims. And one has to remember, China has a right to prosper, to look after its people, and to assert its legitimate interests. But it is this behavior that's the problem. And my difficulty is I'm not quite sure, given the rhetoric, how they're going to ease themselves out of some of those behaviors in a way that will make it clear to the rest of us that things are moderating and that we can get to a situation of this idea of cooperation with a certain element of competition, but balanced.
One of those behaviors which please go ahead, Ambassador.
You see, I think the very aim of this meeting in Alaska is to sort of compare notes on both sides, and that Chinese representatives, Yuan and the Wang Yi, would take back from Alaska to Beijing, that telling that U.S. is tough, and if we don't change the conduct, they'll stick on to tough position or even tougher position. That message should be brought back to to Beijing, and
Xi Jinping.
Yes, and that could sort of start changing from there. So you don't expect that both sides, China and US, would hug each other, smile, and hey, we wanted to meet each other. Now, starting from here, we accept both your position. And that's a more problem. So I think it's not necessary that they discuss cooperation or collaboration or whatever, agree on that now. They should take back their position. I think this is the key. That's how I look.
And it's been building up, as we also spoke about. What if we go back maybe even 2 weeks, or definitely 2 months or 2 years? What happened with the Quad and the summit meeting? Even if it is virtual, they're now announcing that the heads of state will also meet in person, possibly sometime later this year, maybe on the sidelines of either the EU or the ESM. So before I come back to you for comments on how you think the Quad has impacted China's behavior, I just want to play out some of the excerpts from the statements from the four heads of state, President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Suga, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison as well.
And we're renewing our commitment to ensure that our region is governed by international law, committed to upholding universal values, and free from coercion. We've got a big agenda ahead of us, gentlemen, as you well know, but I'm optimistic about our prospects. The Quad is going to be a vital arena for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And
we will work together closer than ever before for advancing our shared values and promoting a secure, stable, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Today's summit meeting shows that Quad has come of age. It will now remain an important pillar of stability in the region.
Let our partnership be the enabler of peace, stability, and prosperity, and to do so inclusively with the many nations of our region, to share in their vision as expressed through ASEAN for an open, inclusive, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific, to respect and support their sovereignty, independence and security by upholding our values and supporting international law, and to address the many challenges we face from COVID to climate change.
With the four countries working together, I wish to firmly advance our cooperation to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific and to make visible and tangible contribution to the peace, stability, and prosperity of the region, including overcoming COVID-19.
Ambassador Goldrick, how much has the Quad summit, I mean, the step up that happened on March 12th there, affected how China is and will be behaving?
I hope it's given China pause for thought. What struck me was the effort that all the partners were making to emphasize cooperation, and that to some extent it's implicit. They're saying, look, the Quad can do its work, but we do actually see there's potential for that Chinese phrase of win-win. In other words, that this may be because of China, but it doesn't necessarily need all to be aimed at China. And I think particularly the decisions about the cooperation on dealing with COVID, with the vaccine promises, and Australia being the first deliverer in Southeast Asia, are typical of that. So I think it may, and again, it really comes back to the ambassador's point. I think the approach they've taken is trying to give China as much room as possible to actually cooperate and understand that the way the Quad unfolds and the priorities the Quad has may well depend directly upon China's behaviour, because I do see it is a mechanism for doing all sorts of good things which aren't directly related to the challenge of China.
Ambassador, the Quad and the message that's being sent out about the positive aspect of the Quad, especially after the summit. But like Admiral Goldrick is pointing out, the glue that binds all four countries is China's behavior. Do you think China has been given room to maneuver, or is it the other way around?
You see, it's not that China was given room or anything. I think should not be given too much room as well. What's important is that two things. One is that they're meeting ahead of meeting with Chinese. And before, if you remember, US was dealing with North Korea or China. Usually they would do that and then brief us later. But now they, through Quad or 2+2 or other mechanism, they're discussing with partners and then go on to meet Chinese. And this sort of sequence is very important. That's point one. Point two is that in the last Quad, they agreed that they'll have the next one. And I think in between, there'll be foreign minister or other officials. And so it's going to be more institutionalized in a way. So,
Admiral, I'm sure you agree with
also important. Yeah.
Yeah. Admiral, I'm sure you agree with both it being symbolic, but also the sequencing being extremely important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the significance with which America's treating its partners, I think, is perhaps better than it has in many years in relation to the problems of the region. And I completely agree that's highly significant. And also, I think the other point about institutionalizing things, I think the way it's being done will also give a lot of opportunity to institutionalize cooperation, and this will include military, naval, and security cooperation in ways that will be really important, but how shall I put it, won't be done in such a way as to exacerbate situations. In other words, it's not about propaganda, it is about actually putting things in place and having them in place, again, that I think will be understood and read by the Chinese, but will be very difficult to become a cause of contention in itself. So I think that the institutionalizing of a lot of activities is going to be extremely important.
Sure. And on the maritime domain, now apart from the Malabar exercises that were carried out, Ambassador Fujisaki, India and the Quad are also involving France next month. There will be UAE separately with naval exercises. So the signaling continues. It's in terms of how do you see China responding though to this?
Well, Chinese is already sort of showing their muscle with the introducing of new Coast Guard law started from February the 1st. And but I think it's very good that like-minded countries like France or UK is trying to be in Pacific. It's because they have, of course, territory there, but more because Pacific is the region growing. Indo-Pacific, I'm sorry, is a growing region, and I think they have much interest in there. And it's very important that they show very tangible sort of attitude of trying to be involved in this. And I think, for example, UK is seriously considering coming into TPP, and I think these are very, things to be welcomed.
Admiral Goldrick, in terms of the Quad's maritime dimension continuing, do you see it getting more institutionalized, being enlarged, even if it's not under that rubric of the Quad itself? But we do know France is coming in for exercises as well.
Yes, indeed. It'll be exercise La Pérouse in a couple of months' time with a French amphibious group. I do think that there will be an emphasis on increasing cooperation, increasing the opportunities. I don't necessarily see everything will be branded as Quad, but I think that the French amphibious group, the prospect of the British carrier battle group and around the Queen Elizabeth coming into the region from about the middle of the year, I think sends an important political signal. It will inevitably be temporary, but it also, those sort of things do provide a very good mechanism for bringing navies and other services and nations together to cooperate. I would like to see that particularly with India, but it's also with Japan, that we work on maritime domain awareness in its fullest sense, and that's not just military. I think the continuing better understanding of maritime domain in relation to transnational crime and things like illegal fishing is very important. But I'd like to see more emphasis, more efforts, and again, I don't think this will need to be public. More emphasis on information sharing, understanding what's happening in the region, and working with each other in those ways, I think is a very high priority for me.
A lot of cooperation we've seen directly between the US and India on ISR. But Ambassador Fujisaki, when you're talking about China's response, now, I beg your pardon, Alaska's just going to go into its second day, but there's already been an announcement that the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will travel on Monday and Tuesday to Beijing to meet Wang Yi. How do you see the Russia-China angle to all of this?
Well, I don't think really Chinese would try to sort of replace, to put that much importance on relations with Russia. Russia is trying to take advantage of that more, I think. But what's important is that the Chinese diplomacy has been, I think, not really flowing very well. They're not antagonizing only the United States. They didn't have to take that kind of attitude to Australia or India or France or UK. They are trying to sort of confront in Japan and everyone. And I think that has triggered this attitude of others. And they are now sort of being, taking lessons from what they have done. I think that's how I look at it.
Admiral Goldrick, when you talk about Australia, that's what's interesting, even in those, whether it was theatrics or however you want to look at it in Alaska, the Secretary Blinken and Jake Sullivan were talking about Australia and the coercion that China was putting on Australia as being a key element on the table. So it's not just that each country is looking out for itself.
Yeah, that's the important part.
No, and that's been good. I mean, informally also, business. It's an aphorism that the businessman will always get through. One of the striking things has been the rapid development of alternative markets for some of the things that have been blocked by China. But I think the key point is, and again, I think China hasn't thought these things through properly in many ways, is the extent to which it indicates you can sign an agreement for trade and so on with China, but can you trust them to actually keep that agreement? And I think
it's
that
not just
uncertainty.
trade. I mean, all the peace and tranquility agreements that we've signed, that's India signed from 1988 onwards on the border, have virtually been torn up and destroyed. What happened in the Himalayas? Yes,
indeed. And I mean, to back the ambassador's point, I think the Britain in particular, but I think other European powers and indeed Canada and Australia have expressed their concern about the dealing with the agreements over Hong Kong.
Correct. Ambassador, when you're just coming back to, again, the Quad and the working groups that have been set up, you pointed out that there will be other meetings between officials apart from the summit level, which they want to have in person. But it is key, even though it's positive and you're looking at the coronavirus cooperation, you're looking at climate change, but they were also looking at emerging technologies and rare earths, where again, China has a huge monopoly. Ambassador?
Yes, I think technology is very important. It's not, as Admiral said, it's not only Quad, but I think we should cooperate with Europeans as well. And it's telecommunications, space, cyber, all these new areas, which I think US has sort of not taken initiative too much for some time, but now coming back to world scene through international organization. And I think we should welcome that and try to work with US on and try to sort of form some collaboration, Quad and others as well, on technology. That's, I think, a very important point.
Admiral, if you want to take that, and also the fact that among the Quad, America is the first country that has had a government change after elections. Japan had not really a government change in elections. The other two still have to have theirs in future. And there's been no change in stance as such. If you want to take those last 2 points when you talk about emerging technologies and the Quad stance.
Well, I can completely endorse the need for cooperation on emerging technology and also developing more resilience and alternative supplies. And actually, I think there's a wider question here, which is we've been reminded by the pandemic about the need for resilience and fallback positions if something happens at a time of when climate change is coming and there are many challenges in the world. I think we need to have more of a braces and belt attitude, to use the English idiom. As to the changes of government, my sense is, particularly the way the Quad is developing, that there may, at the next election, if there were in Australia to be a change of government, while I think the Labor Party, who are in opposition, might be perhaps more moderate in their phrasing, I think while the Quad is evolving in the way it is, I think it's likely to have their support. Certainly, it's they haven't indicated any difficulties with it. So my feeling is that the leadership in Australia across the political spectrum, certainly the major parties, very much endorses this sort of cooperative approach with other democracies. And as I say, in the way it seems to be unfolding and being handled at the moment.
Ambassador, if you want to take last comments before I wind up.
No, I think I've conveyed everything I wanted to say, and I totally agree with the Admiral.
So, Ambassador Fujisaki, again, really appreciate your time, experience, and expertise. Thank you for joining us on StratNews, Ambassador.
Amitabh-san, thank you very much for having me. We'll see you in the future. Admiral as well. Thank you very much.
Very good to meet you, Ambassador.
And Admiral Goldrick, again, thank you for spending some time with us on StratNews Global with your expertise. Have a great day and great night, both of you, since there's a time difference between us. Thank you again, both of you.
Thank you very much indeed. See you all.
And just a reminder to all our viewers, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on that bell icon. Do also go onto our website to support our kind of journalism. Follow our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to get the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. This is Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.